Today, we become legends.
You might have heard me mention the January patch in previous videos, but I want to start this one off by saying that there's no official indication that we are actually getting a bigger than normal patch in January, and it's entirely possible, maybe even likely, that the team just continues pushing on their standard 2-week cycle. Basically, this isn't an expectations video, it's more of just a wish list for stuff that I would like to see if we did end up getting a big January patch. This whole idea stems from Smite always doing big update drops and new launches in January throughout pretty much its entire life cycle, with the only exception being the initial launch of Season 1 of Smite 1, which happened in April 2014. Since then, every January has been a new season patch with a lot of changes. Smite 2 was officially revealed for the first time in January as well, and the free-to-play open beta launch of Smite 2 was also in January, so that's where this idea comes from. So the first thing I would want to see is a highly anticipated God release. Depending on where the team wants to go, this could either be a brand new God if they think they're ready for that, or one of the highly requested ports that haven't made it into the game yet for various reasons. Cthulhu and King Arthur will be my top two picks for this hype port, as they're both very wanted and both did numbers for the game on their initial release, with Cthulhu specifically being the biggest God release of all time for Smite 1. Both of these gods are hard to create on a technical level, which is why they aren't in the game yet despite community demand, but I think the big January patch would be a perfect time to put the work in and drop one of these two. Maybe alongside some kind of in-game event around Eldritch or Arthurian themes respectively. As mentioned though, a brand new God release will be ideal for this period, but given the team's general messaging on Titan Talk recently, they want to focus on God ports for right now until they can make a bigger moment out of new God releases and do them justice. But what bigger moment than a big January patch, right? Quick data mining spoilers ahead, so skip to this time in the video if you don't want to hear about potential data mine candidates for the next brand new God. Hastur, the King in Yellow from Lovecraftian mythos, appeared in data mining quite a while back and was officially named the H-God by Hi-Rez. But he has since been delayed and it's pretty likely there will be a different god in their place, and Hastur will probably release later. More recently, Balder has appeared in data mining, who's the Norse god of light and purity, who was famously weak to mistletoe and was slain by a tipped spear wielded by his blind brother, who was tricked by Loki. So based on what we know currently from data mining, Balder seems somewhat likely to be the next brand new god, so if they did decide to drop one in January, it would likely be him and not Hastur. But to be honest, right now, I wouldn't expect a brand new god release in January, to be honest, so maybe one of the more anticipated ports like King Arthur or Cthulhu would do better. The next thing I'd like to see in the big January patch is either a brand new Conquest map or some big updates to the current one. At this point, a brand new map as early as January is likely wishful thinking, given how the team is currently putting a lot of work into the map right now. If they were making a brand new map behind the scenes, I don't think they'd be putting as much work into this one as they are currently. So more likely, I would expect continued updates to the current Conquest map, and what I think it needs right now are some geometry and layout shakeups. We've been essentially playing on the same core map for more than a year and a half at this point, and while the changes made have certainly improved things, I think some shakeups to the core geometry and layout would breathe a bit of life back into things. Specifically, I think the side jungles need to be looked at in terms of reworking their purpose in the game or removing them entirely. Personally, I lean towards reworking them as I think they can be interesting and good for the game, but I'm not against totally removing them either. Another thing I'd like to see for Conquest are the Tiki masks, which is probably the coldest take you've ever heard, and I think 90% of Smite content creators have called for these to return at this point, but I truly think they were one of the coolest +1 changes that Conquest got in Smite 1. I'm not as against the infamy system as some others seem to be, and I think it could totally work well with some changes, but Tiki masks arguably did the same thing but better in Smite 1. For those unaware, these were a series of 5 masks that you could obtain from the Shaman camp that appeared on your jungle buffs and granted specific effects like CDR, health, attack speed, lifesteal, or penetration. They were a lot of fun to play with, and I think bringing them back for a January patch would be hype and get some people back who maybe quit Smite 2 or took a break. Data mining spoilers again for this next one, skip to this time if you want to avoid that. A while back in data mining, some elemental Gold Fury variants appeared that would spawn randomly in place of the regular Gold Fury, similar to League of Legends' Dragon system. These would all grant unique bonus effects, and there were Nature, Fire, Lightning, Earth, and Cosmic Furies that appeared in the mining. These seem like it would basically be an expanded version of Primal and Oni Fury from Smite 1, and it seems really interesting, especially for higher level play where you might want to prioritize a certain Fury spawn if it's good for your team's game plan, or give one up potentially and trade for Pyromancer if you don't care that much about its effect. It's purely just data mining, nothing official, and there hasn't been an update on any of this in months, so it appears it's probably been shelved, but I think this will be a good new mechanic to bring people back to the game and refresh the game for those still playing. Next, I think the side teleporters absolutely need to be looked at for changes. At the very least, I think making them work like the Smite 1 teleporters with vision and sound indicators and putting you in the middle of the lane instead of the corners would be great. If I had my way, teleporters would just be gone entirely, as I think they're bad for the game and devalue the impact of proper rotations and macro map play. But if they do want to keep teleporters in the game long term, something needs to be done about them, because the way they currently work is far from ideal. And finally, for Conquest, just continue on the current trajectory of visual improvements alongside these gameplay suggestions. They've been doing great work in making the map look better recently, and more of these kind of updates for the January patch would be great. Nothing much more to say here really. The visuals of Conquest are improving at a good pace right now, and if that continues, the map will look better than Smite 1 pretty soon, I think. Next, I'd like to see some kind of item shakeup. This could be in a variety of forms, with probably the best one in my eyes being glyphs coming back to the game. These were additional tier 4 upgrades to certain items with 2 options that cost 600 gold. They gave no stats, but some kind of additional passive. A lot of these were situational, which I thought was quite well done. It was a good way to have situational effects in the game that don't take up an entire item. You had 2 options, and if one of them was situational, like anti-heal, or not good for your build, like attack speed on ability god or whatever, you could just grab the other option. They could bring back glyphs as is if they wanted to, or even do more with them and expand on it, or tweak the way they're implemented to spice things up. Either way though, I think glyphs will be one of the simplest ways to bring an item shakeup to the game for a big January update. They could do this in other ways though. Personally, another thing I'd like to see is a large pass on reworking a bunch of the less used and boring items in the game. Something akin to what they did with Sphere of Negation recently, and just refine the item pool a little bit. You could add new items too, but I think there's at least a dozen items in Smite 2 right now that are just never bought and kind of boring. So I prefer to rework those before adding more new stuff and potentially bloating the item pool. But yeah, some kind of item shakeup with a new system or new options will be great for this big January update. So this next one is honestly a bit of a lofty idea and absolutely would not be feasible to implement in the roughly 2 months we have before this patch will go live, but it's an idea I think they should implement at some point, and that would be a weekly rotating queue that they can fill with less popular modes and side modes. These could be something as simple as match of the day like Omnipotence, but could also include stuff like Corrupted Arena, ranked joust and duel tournaments that run for the week, displaying a leaderboard with prizes for the top places at the end. If they ever did adventure modes again, they could throw these into the rotation of the weekly queue. Hell, you could even throw modes like Slash and Domination in here if you wanted. Obviously, that's a lot of work to create the maps in UE5 for these modes just to have them in a weekly queue. But this would certainly solve the low population and splitting the player base issues that these modes caused. If they're available for a week and they're gone for a while, you might see more people hopping in for that week and being excited about it coming back in the future for another week of Slash or Domination or whatever else. I just kind of like this idea of a weekly queue where you could house game modes that would not normally work as their own evergreen queue, but would work if they're just available for a week every now and then, as they will probably get more players hopping in just to play a few games before it rotates out. Moving on though, another thing I'd like to see in a big January update is a new Wandering Market collection. Now, I'm not saying these need to return to an 8-week cadence like they had before, but I think having one occasionally to hype up a big patch could be good. As they were almost certainly unsustainable for high-res given the insanely low price for what you got out of them. And if they were ever to return on a regular 8-week basis, they would have to be priced a lot higher to be sustainable. But I think as an occasional thing that just happens 2 or 3 times a year, they could work and would bring some extra hype and reason to grind the new update. They could even be themed around the main event of the update, so if, as I mentioned earlier, the January update is the launch of King Arthur or something, they could do an Arthurian themed collection. All the same for an Eldritch collection if Cthulhu was the launch god of that update. It would just be a good way to hype up the big new update and get people grinding the game to unlock the collection. Obviously, there's more stuff that should probably be in an update like this, such as optimization work, some new aspects, balance changes, etc. But those are the main things I will be looking at for a potential bigger than normal January update. Again, like I said at the start of the video, there's been no indication from the team that a big January patch is actually coming at all, and it seems more likely they will just continue their regular 2-week patches into the new year once they're done with the Christmas break. But if it were to happen, these are the things I'd like to see for that kind of a patch. And of course, if it doesn't happen, these are just things I'd like to see improved in the game over the next few months going into 2026. What are your thoughts though? Let me know down below, and I will catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.